Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Egyptian-African relations, as Egypt's vision is based on the African Union program of the year 2063 and the United Nations program of 2030 for Africa is the main topic now in this segment of the Breakfast Show. And to shed more light on this, we have the pleasure to have with us our dear guest, Dr. Ismail Hamid, researcher in African Studies and History. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Well, Dr. Hamid, what is the, I know, of course, it's a long history of the relations between Egypt and Africa, but could we start with the roots? When did it start, and give us a hint about the history of the relations Egypt and Africa?
Thank you so much for the kind invitation. And surely that Egypt and Africa, we have very long story, not history, it's a long story that started from earlier time. And if we talk and brief about that, the main roots, we have natural ties that links Egypt and Africa. First of all, we have the territory. So we live on the same territory that's called the African continent. And also we have the same river with 11 African countries, that is the River Nile, running as the longest river and the widest Nile basin, and so on. Also, we can talk also about even common grandfather. That is for the grandfather of Egyptian, and that is in traditional sources, that is called Misraim, son of Ham, son of Noe. And he was the brother of Cush, Cush, son of Ham, son of Noe. And both of them, they were brothers, and one of them is the grandfather of Egyptians, and one of them the grandfather of the Kushite groups and the Kushite peoples, that they are the African south of Sahara. If we talk historically, so we have very long story that started at least from 5,000 years ago. For the first historical record that we have for a link between Egypt and Africa, we talk about Africa south of Sahara, that is related to the 5th Pharaonic dynasty, when an Egyptian pharaoh or a king called Sahara, he sent a commercial expedition or a commercial boats to the land of Punt. Punt, that now it is the land of the Horn Africa, or the African Horn, that is Somalia, Djibouti, and a part of Ethiopia. So he sent that commercial there. That is from the 5th dynasty. Also from 6th dynasty, also we have some Egyptian explorators like Harhuf, that he would like to explore the sources of the Nile. That from the 6th dynasty, nearly 2400 BC, 4,400 years ago. After that, we have from the time of the Queen Hatshepsut. She sent a big float, commercial expedition, and also we have all these relations that surely they send that to the African Horn, to the east of Africa. We have all this record of the Queen Hatshepsut, okay, during the 18th dynasty on the walls of its famous temple in Deir al-Bahari in Luxor. We have that old story about the commercial goods and the merchandise that came from this African part. And then with the very long story during the old time that we have this, and then we come to the Islamic time. We have also very long story with that, with modern times, so we can talk with details about that after this. But also a very important part of that story, the three religions, okay, celestial religions that they spread, and they were spreading in Africa by the land of Egypt. From Judaism itself, that started with Moses, who was Egyptian, and that also that they went there for them as the first monotheist religion. Christianity with Egyptian church, especially was San Mark, and that story spreading to go there to the heart of Africa. Islam also was spreading also from the land of Egypt. Lots of stories that we have as a common between Egypt and Africa.
Yes, so Dr. Hamid, there are several things that connect Egypt with Africa. through the history.
Yes.
Like, for example, there are several monuments that extends from Egypt in Upper Egypt until in Sudan and in several
Yes.
countries in South Africa, and especially we can also add the most important factor, which is the River Nile that connects 11
Yes.
11 African
11 African
countries
temples.
in the Nile basin since long ago, of course, with Egypt and Sudan as the downstream countries.
Yes. So, as a natural link, that is the Nile.
Yes.
The appearance of the Nile in history about 40 million years ago. 40 million years ago,
Yes.
we have a link between Egypt and the heart of Africa. River Nile, as we know that, it is the longest river of the world. That's 6,700 kilometers long and came from the two main sources, as we know, Ethiopian source by what we call it the Blue Nile, and from the equatorial lake of Victoria, as we call it as the White Nile. And then the Nile is running in 11 African countries. The farthest part that start the Nile, that is Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, North Sudan, and then Egypt. Imagine that spreading basin of the Nile between all these African countries, so we have the same water that we drink from the same source. So the Nile is very important for Egypt and for Africans. So when the Greek historian Herodot came to Egypt in 445 BC, and he saw the Nile and he knew lots of things about the value of the Nile, he called Egypt as the gift of the Nile. So for that also related, the Nile was Egyptian history, so we call it at the Nile Valley civilization, or the history of the Nile Valley. So it's very important with the link between Egypt and Africa by the Nile across the history till our time.
Yes, yes. So, Dr. Hamid, also when President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was the president of the African Union, he knew very much the importance of Africa to Egypt. And since then, Egypt was back to Africa and Africa was back to Egypt. So give us a hint about this, please.
Yes, so in modern times, so the relation between Egypt and Africa had mainly three phases. First phase, it was with the revolution 1952. So we know what President Nasser, he made with Africa as supporting all the independence movements in Africa and to have their independence from the European and Occidental imperialism, and also to help them also to keep their identity and their culture and lots of things, and also even to broadcast also channels with African languages and lots of things that Egypt made at this time. So it was a great link between Egypt and Africa that arrives till a limit that an African president on the time of President Nasser, he is Kwame Nkrumah, that he was the president of Ghana. He married an Egyptian wife, Fathia Nkrumah. So that was the apogee and the peak of the link between Egypt and Africa during this period. After that, we have the period during the times of the year 1960, 1970, especially with the aggression of Israel in Egypt, 67, and then also the victory of Egypt after that. So Egypt was a little bit busy of its interior, interested that also to get back its to land from the occupation and so on. So that was not very strong. And then after that, with the 30 years of President Mubarak, we know that what happened there, and it was a kind of separating between Egypt and Africa till 2014. That is the year that was considering to be a turning page on the relation, and Egypt was turning strongly to Africa. And we know that we have lots of common interests. We have also common destiny between Egypt and Africa, and especially with the Nile and lots of things that we have. So that was considered to be a very important phase from the year 2014 with the President Al-Sisi, that we have that as a relation with Africa as a priority, but one of the first priority of Egyptian government from that year till nowadays. And I think that with the meetings with the African presidents and from in Egypt and outside of Egypt, and all these official visits are very important to show that how Africa nowadays is a priority for Egyptian policy.
Yes, Dr. Hamid, recently in last November, Egypt have organized a very successful conference, which is a COP27. So, with Africa the least responsible for affecting the climate
Yes.
in the whole world, the least responsible. And with Africa having natural resources,
Yes.
still Africa is still suffering from the climate change.
Yeah, it's a kind of injustice that we have it in our time. I can say that Africa, it's the most purest climate
Yes,
that we
of
have
course.
in the world between this.
Yes.
And as you said, that at least that is affecting of the climatic problems and so on. That all these problems, they came from outside. But also
yes,
the
that's
African
true.
people, that they suffer of this. So Egypt
Yes.
also, as the voice of Africa during that conference, that is to show the whole world that the right image of this. So it's very important to know that the Occident, they are responsible of the problems of the climate. You know that Egypt is more, Africa is more natural.
Yes.
We have very short or very a small number of factories and artificial things that's affecting negatively the climate. So that Africa is not responsible of all this, but is the peoples of Africa, they are suffering more than the others, especially with the technology that is also on the same time less than it. In the other side, with the sources also still pure, and now we call it every time. We know that as a fact that Africa is the continent of the future.
Yes.
So lots of universal powers and big powers in the world that they look for Africa and how to exploit it. They exploit it during the imperial time, especially that started from the year 1960 or before 1960. You know that, so they know the value of Africa and the sources that it has, so exploit it so much. And even after the independence, also we can see their intervention in the African affairs, also to get more exploitation of the African sources. So for this time, we need more unite between the all African countries, okay, and to know our common interests, and also for not to be every time surrendered by the Occidental exploitation and also their politics that is mainly against the African interests. Very important to be more united and also to avoid all this intervention that is very negative for the African peoples.
Yes. So, Dr. Hamid, when President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was the President of the African Union, he said concerning the trade and investment in Africa, he said that the future of trade in the world is going to be in Africa. So give us an idea about this.
Is Africa, as I said, that it's a pure continent. It's also still rich of all kind of natural resources, from oil, petroleum, from also the gold, from the gas, uranium, and lots of things. And I think what happens for the tensions that happens on the bordering countries of us, that is because of because of the Occidental intervention on the African affairs. So we insist that for this point to have more uniting, okay, to be with each other and to have common economic blocks. That Egypt also, we know that when Egypt called for making the African Union, that was from the call of Egypt, that started from Egypt, and also the first conferences also that was in Egypt and so on. So even with economic blocks in local regions in Africa, also Egypt supporting that so much. We need this, very important, that's to be the common sources of the African peoples, to be the Africans themselves, not to be for other countries from outside.
Yes. So, Dr. Hamid, concerning Egypt's vision, which is based on African Union program of the year 2063.
Yeah, that is the main image for more uniting, and also to understand the defiance and the challenges that we have from outside, and how to protect ourselves from this, and also how also to benefit of our resources, that is for the African people. That is very important for that
Yes.
vision, and to have more also economic combination between Egypt and Africa. And I think now Egypt made lots of projects in African countries. We made the dam in Tanzania. We made lots of projects by Arab tractors in
Yes,
lots
of
of
course.
African countries. So we
Yes.
have lots of these signs, but we need also to increase that on the same time.
Yes, also, Dr. Ismail, the United Nations Program 2030 for Africa.
United Nations, the vision is different. United Nations also, it's not ideal for us. Surely that what made United Nations, and also what about the programs of United Nations behind that, that is the Occident and United States. It's a little bit different of
Yes.
the local vision of Egypt. So I think the Egyptian vision, it's more united with African
Yes,
people.
I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you
and
so
thank
much.
you for your valuable information. Dr. Ismail Hamid, researcher in African Studies and History.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Thank
I
you.
really had the honor to have
Thank you
with
so
us
much.
today.
I'm
thank
very
you so
happy.
much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, with this, my dear viewers, we come to the end of this episode of our program, The Breakfast Show. I was in the company of my colleague Nermeen Abdurrahman. My name is Amal Mukhtar. Thank you for watching.